Island ECC.
Island ECC.
Island ECC.
Island ECC is
Island ECC to me is a great fun, and the reason for that is because God and 100%
Family to me.
Blessing to me.
Family.
second home.
Is a place like home to me.
Home to me.
Changed my life.
The place for me to learn.
Island ECC is my happy place.
Where I found my Hong Kong family.
Where I met my wonderful husband.
Island ECC is home to us. Home.
Home.
Second home.
Home to me.
Community to me.
Weekly spiritual refreshment to me.
Family to me.
Family.
Family.
Island ECC is my home church for 21 years.
Special to me.
Island ECC is melting hardened hearts for me.
Island ECC is a new beginning to me.
Island ECC is community for me.
Island ECC is like a warm hug to me.
Island ECC is awesome and fun to me.
Island ECC to me is a place of just wondrous community, great fun, wonderful staff, amazing service, and the most wondrous worship that I think I've ever experienced. And the reason for that is because God is absolutely and 100% present in these prayer-soaked walls. That's what Island ECC is to me.
All right, that's pretty good, right? You know, whatever your story is, there are those that have been here since day one, 25 years ago. I myself came as fast as I could. I've been here 23 years and a bit. There are those that have been here. Today is your first day. Whatever your story is, wherever you are in the journey, we're really glad that you're here. And I hope that today we walk away with a renewed sense of celebration of this God that we pursue, this God that we have a relationship with, a yearning to understand more fully. 25 years is really not that long, right? It's long enough, though, for us to be able to discern what God has been doing over this time, to be able to celebrate his faithfulness in each of our lives, and then to turn to the future and take that emboldened faith and to believe him for even greater things still. 25 years. We're going to look today at this concept of story. We'll start by looking at your story, the individual story, and then move to our story as a church, and then even bigger to God's story of redemption. But as we start here, we recognize that God is busy about creating a story for each one of us. That our lives are far more than simply details of education and career and address. That it's far more than just what we do for a living. It's far more than just what part we play in our immediate family, that God is taking the whole of our life and he is weaving together details, people, community, conversations, ups and downs, weaving all that together for something far more glorious. 8,234,903,201. As of Friday morning, that was the global population. It's slightly higher now. You are one of 8 billion people. I mean, that's nothing, right? I mean, your life is only one of those. It is like a drop in the Atlantic. It is seemingly insignificant. It pales against this massive backdrop of everybody that's alive today. Now, think about everybody that's been alive forever and even how much smaller that makes you. And yet, as seemingly small as we may feel against that massive panoply of people, you're important and significant. The psalmist writes it this way: your eyes, speaking of God, saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. He recognized that God was the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, that God knew everything about you even before you came to be on this earth. That your days were ordained, determined by the God of the universe, that he determines the time and the places of your habitation, it will say in Acts. That God is intricately involved, that he is not overwhelmed with these numbers. He is intricately aware and concerned about every detail of your life. I mean, you're small, but you're not. In Matthew, it says this, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. Even the hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." Sparrow, this small, cheap bird, the most insignificant. And we're reminded there that God knows and cares about that sparrow. How much more does he know and he care about you? If it's important to you, it is important to him. If it's a burden you carry, it's a burden he wants to relieve. If it's a joy you experience, he wants to enter into that celebration. That God is always just on the edge, waiting for you to receive and invite him into the everyday of your life. He cares about it all. I remember as an early Christian hearing someone say that they always prayed for a parking spot. And I remember thinking, how about world hunger? Isn't that a better prayer? I mean, spiritually smug as I was, praying about parking spots. I mean, should we? Well, God cares about everything. If you care about it, he cares about it. So we bring everything before him as big and as massive and overwhelming or as trite and silly. It doesn't matter. The point is that he wants us to come into his presence and he meets us there. Your story is glorious because it is not just being written by you. It is being authored by the God of the universe who set you into motion, who breathed life into you, who sustains your heart and your lungs and your brain waves. It is that very God who wants you to discover the reality of all that he is doing right in your very midst. Your life is glorious, but it is easy to miss. It is so easy amid all the distractions, the pace that we keep, the people that we have to maintain, the emails we must respond to, the deadlines that we must meet, the goals that we must achieve, all of the emotions that we feel that we have to manage. Amid all of that, it is easy to miss the bigger picture of what God is doing right in front of our eyes. In Matthew chapter 25, it's a chapter that we'll look at more next week, but we often refer to it here because it is here that we are told the church is responsible to care for those that can't care for themselves, to care for those who are marginalized in our world, to look after the needy, the weak. And there we see the story of what it's like for some group to not recognize or not care for the needy and others that did. And pick up the story here in 25 verse 37. It says, "The righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink?' And he will reply and say, 'When you did it to the least of these, you did it to me.' That I was there. That when you cared for someone, when you fed someone, when you encourage someone, those acts are actually godly acts, and Jesus is in the very midst of that. But here, even the righteous say, we didn't see you. We didn't know you were there. It is easy to miss the reality of what God is doing in our lives. If asked, hey, what has God done in your life? Some would stutter and say, I'm not sure. I don't know. Or some would reach back to some answered prayer from 10 years ago that they've been leaning on as a sign of God being active in their life for a good decade. But the more challenging question that may require some thought and reflection is, what is he doing in your life? Because there's an answer. If you don't know it, it's not because of his inactivity, it's because of your distraction. And so he's at work all the time, revealing himself, molding you, shaping us, changing us from the inside out. He is at work. Don't miss it. I love what Peter says about the heart of God. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient. Patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. God is patient, waiting, gently tapping his foot, waiting for you to see, to acknowledge, to respond. He's busy, he's active, he's using all means necessary to get our attention, to reveal himself. I mean, he did the ultimate by sending his son, God in human form, saying, you need to see me? Okay, here's Jesus to live and to die as a human being so that humanity could understand. But as we get years away from that historical event, perhaps it's harder for us to bring it up close. So the reality is that he is patient. He's waiting so that you can see. He's active, he's working, he's using, he's weaving things together so that you will understand more fully how reliable, how trustworthy, how ongoing, consistent his character is. He is patient, not wanting anyone to perish. Said another way, God woos. This is a good word, and we should use this word more, I think. Woos. Often we hear it in a romantic context. He's wooing her. He's buying her flowers and chocolates, sending her notes, right? It's this idea of romantic, trying to get the affection of, to woo someone. But as God woos, it's a different story. It is him trying to allow us to see what has always been true, that he has always been loving and kind and forgiving. He has always been near. And so to us, with our finite minds and our distracted, fickle hearts, he continues in his patience to woo us. He does it in a variety of ways. One is through wonder. In Romans chapter 1, we are told that God reveals himself to all people everywhere through nature. That we look at the mountains and the skies and the moon and the stars and the sea and the surf, things created by him for his glory, so that we look and go, wow, there's got to be more. We see order in the universe. We see seasons and days and sunrises and sunsets, and it all works. And we recognize order must happen with a divine mind. There's got to be a creator that created with order for this to all make sense. It's not a mistake. And so we see through wonder that God gets our attention, but also through conscience, that we have an innate sense of what is right and what is wrong, that we all kind of gravitate to a same kind of core sense of beliefs, that all cultures everywhere would come up with a similar list of values, if you will, that there is a conscience that God has put within us. It would be Viktor Frankl, an Australian neuroscientist who wrote a book about his journey of faith. And he said he had an aha moment one late night there in Austria when he was about to board a tram of some kind. And it was an honor system of pay as you get on, I think. And he recognized there was nobody there, that nobody would know. There's no cameras. There's nobody monitoring, that he could get on and go and get off and save some money. But he couldn't do it. There was something in him that thought, I got to do what's right. If I don't do what's right, I'll be bothered by having done what is wrong. That there was a conscience within him. And that conscience led him to the conclusion that that was placed by God himself, the ultimate conscience. You know, the jaywalking rate on Sunday right outside is almost zero. You know what it is on Monday? Like 90%. That says our environment affects our behavior, doesn't it? But beyond that, there is a God within us, a sense of right and wrong that must come from without, not just our own thinking. God woos through circumstances as well. We know it all too well, that we're quick to come to God to pray for our circumstances, that God would answer our prayer in the debilitating prognosis we get, medically speaking, for our finances, our promotions, our career choices, our school choices, that all of these things get our attention where we want God's blessing. He reveals himself, even in our longings or our cravings. We want relief, we want rest, we want recreation, we want entertainment, we want promotion, acknowledgement. But once we get those things, as deserved as they may be, we recognize that it's not enough. I want more. Like a mirage on the horizon, once we get there, we realize it's further down the way. That our cravings, our longings are there to actually reveal to us that there's got to be more. Now, that promotion is not enough. That accomplishment is not enough. That vacation is not enough. And we want more because there is a God-shaped vacuum within the heart of every human being that cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God, the Creator, made known through Jesus Christ, said Augustine. Our longings are intended to draw us to God. Our disappointments, our what we think are unanswered prayers, our discouragements, our struggles, our struggle with our own sin, it leads us to a place of dependence upon God, asking for relief, asking for deliverance. And our joys, experiencing exhilarating aspects of life that needs to be shared with someone else. It's been said that the atheist's greatest dilemma is encountering awe and not having anyone to thank. See, it takes us somewhere. Our joys are intended to be shared and to lead us to a place of gratitude. So don't miss the work of God in your life. Don't let the pace of your life numb you to the realities of what God is doing right here, right now. It is a glorious story. You know, we have collective nouns. We have names for a grouping of things, right? So I've got a little quiz for you. You ready? a sheep, but a group of sheep is called a flock. Okay. I thought that was going to be easy. They get harder from here. So, okay, you ready? Wake up. Here we go. So, a lion, but a group is called a pride. Okay, look, you are awake. A pride of lions. Okay. A personal hug, if anybody gets this one. Flamingo. A group is called... Sorry, I'll have to hug myself. A flamboyance. Isn't that so flamingo? Like, we're a flamboyance. A flamboyance. Okay, this is good. An owl, but a group is... A parliament. So smart. Good job. A parliament of owls. A hug later. Yeah. Okay, here's one. Crocodiles or alligators. A congregation. How great is that? This is actually better than some congregations I've seen. Not you, of course, but... Okay, now, all kidding aside, a group of people, right? Causeway Bay, we just call it a crowd. But if it's a group of Christians, we call it a church. Oh, it's a group of people that believe God, that are pursuing God. It's a church. And so that is the story that we celebrate today, is our story of what God is doing in our lives. A collection of high points and low points, of people at different aspects in the journey, some just investigating faith, some having been in the faith for decades, but all coming together and singing the same songs, some well and some adorable, but nonetheless gathering together as his church. That is our story. 25 years so far of recognizing what God is doing in our midst. You heard some of these earlier, but 1999 was the year, last century, when this church started, when 180 people from ECC meeting at the YMCA in Kowloon decided, let's start a new church. They were busting at the seams. No room to expand, no times to have additional services. They said, let's just start one on Hong Kong Island. The bulk of those people lived on the island and were, can you imagine, crossing the harbor every day to go to church? Evidently, the distance from Kowloon to Island is shorter than from Island to Kowloon. You know that, right? If you live on Kowloon, as I do, you come over here all the time, no big deal. But to get somebody from the island to go across, it's like, I don't even have my passport. How would I do this? 180 people without passports were crossing every week and decided, why don't we create a church right here on Hong Kong Island? And thus began Island ECC, meeting primarily at the convention center, but moving to over 20 different locations, hotel ballrooms, whatever we could find that was available, the nomadic years. And then 2008 is when we moved in here. And you saw that beautiful clip of a video where me with my long flowing hair, regrettable styles, was giving you that video intro to this before it was renovated. I think these are out of order, my bad. 2015 is when we started the Bold Faith campaign. Before that, 2010 is when we planted Watermark Church. It's interesting, we sent out about the same number of people that we started with. I think a little bit more, but sent out leadership, funding, and people to start Watermark Church, which is doing great to this day. And then 2024, purchase of Sunbeam Theater just down the road at 423 Kings Road. So we're staying on King of Kings Road is what I like to call it. We'll move 4 blocks down. So much that God has done. The prophet Habakkuk says this, look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed. His command is to look and be amazed. That when you look, that when you see, when you trace, when you anticipate, that you will be amazed at the work that God is doing. The work that God is busy about redeeming people, reaching people, creatively bringing people from all different walks of life, that he is here to do that. You know, I got a very early taste of what I believe to be God's special message to me to say, my hand is on this church. I was living 25 years ago in Memphis, Tennessee, an associate pastor with 3 young kids and a small little starter home, as they call it, that we thought was getting too small. We needed a bigger one. And that is when I got a phone call from a guy named Jeff Ryan. Jeff Ryan, who was a banker, I think, at Morgan Stanley at the time, but driven, gonna make it happen. Gets my name from a friend of a friend's cousin's neighbor's, coworker, and calls me out of the blue. Remember, so it's year 2001. So I had one of those phones that you had to keep plugged in, and it had to recharge. Do you know that? And it would just go dead on you. It didn't have a cord on it. I remember those kind, but this was that other kind of phone. You had a base that you charged it in. Picked it up, and Jeff says, my name is Jeff Ryan, and I am the chair of the search committee of a church in Hong Kong, and your name has been put forward as a potential candidate. I was like, why do I know that name? I had never met him before. And right next to me, I'm sitting on this sofa, right next to me is a magazine that a guy had given me the week before, this very magazine. I led a Bible study, and the guy, Pete, gave this magazine to everybody in that group, and we were to read an article together and discuss it. And so in that Bible study, we did that thing, and we read this article called The Accidental Investor. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Do you remember that show? It was popular at the time. And in this magazine that was all about life at work, integrating your faith into your career, they'd done an interview with a successful banker in Hong Kong, and we read it, and it was this guy, Jeff Ryan. I had just read the article, and now he's calling me. How many times does that happen? And again, my wife and I were saying, we need a bigger house, not a smaller flat. So there was some initial pushback. Thanks so much for calling. But I'm got a good role here and serving God here, and we need a bigger house. And I had the ultimate trump card to play on him because I had a verse. If you want to win an argument, bring a verse. And I had this one. This is pure and undefiled religion, to care for widows and orphans. And my father had passed away about a year before, and so my mom was a widow, and I needed to, care for her. And I can't move across the world, take her 3 of her 4 grandchildren, and care for her, right? Though I would love to, I got to obey the scripture. And so I talked to my mom, and she said, what a great opportunity. It's like, no, Mom. No. Be needy. Cry, be needy. Don't champion this. Bigger house. And I knew God was in it. And I reluctantly, a little bit, sheepishly made my way to Hong Kong, interviewed, preached a sermon. Shannon would accuse me of sabotaging. She was like, you didn't bring your best in that sermon. I was like, well, it is what it is. Perhaps because I was relaxed and not trying to impress, maybe that was the thing that was impressive. But the bigger story is that God was in it. is that God was weaving together a young fledgling church and me, a young fledgling pastor, to kind of cooperate and grow up together what would be the next 25 years. So many stories to be told of how God has used this church. And many times I would refer to this magazine and that story in my life to recall and remember that God's hand is on this church. There would be so many stories I would meet and encounter over time. Early on, I remember meeting a guy who worked for the Consulate General of Egypt. I don't think I'd ever met anybody from Egypt, but he was coming to worship at our church. And I got to know him over time, and he was really growing in his faith. And then, as it is in those roles, 2 years later, he was moved to his next posting. But as he left, he would say, "Thank you. This church has built my faith. I want to go and be stronger and more outspoken as an Egyptian Christian wherever I go." I've lost touch with him. I don't know where he is now. But that conversation had an imprint on me. I remember counseling with a couple that couldn't be any lower. They had struggled with infertility for years, but that's not why they were in my office. It was infidelity. To add insult to injury, this couple was just on the brink of saying it's over. But they trusted God. They repented as needed. They sought wisdom to rebuild what they believed God wanted to resurrect. And I would have the privilege a year or so later to do a small, intimate ceremony where they would renew their vows to one another. And then God would give them children. Wow. You know, we have a special needs ministry here that I'm especially proud of because my wife started it. So it's the best thing we have going. We currently have served 116 families so far. Each of these families has their child is matched with what we call a Marvel Buddy, a volunteer that says, "I will be right next to that kid." Some with minor issues, some with quite major, but paired with a Marvel Buddy to kind of walk through either kids club or youth, whatever level they may be. And so these 116 families so far, over the past 7 years, have been served by over 150 different people that are Marvel Buddies. Anonymously, gloriously giving their hour and a half on a Sunday so that a family can come and just listen and not worry, where they can worship without holding. What a blessing. There will be at 3:30 today a banker from Australia who has served faithfully for 7 years. Every week that he is in town, he schleps himself up here and he works with a guy named Kendrick, who is his Marvel Buddy, who he's seen grow for 7 years faithfully. And lives are changed. I think about the young couple who moved to Hong Kong in their early mid-30s, and they were careered, they were focused, both of them. I would later learn that they grew up in Christian homes in the UK, but they had walked away from faith because life was busy and priorities had changed, and they were career people with this window to prove themselves and climb the ladder, and Hong Kong is a place to do that. But they arrived here and soon realized friends would be nice. And so they came back to church, a familiar place from earlier in their lives, with the slightly impure motive of just finding friends. Let's be honest, we've all got impure motives. Theirs was pretty flagrant, obvious. That's why they were here. But over time, I would get to know them and realize that beyond establishing community, which they did, they also resurrected a faith that had lain dormant. And I remember when this guy told me, hey, my parents are coming in town next week. And I could tell what he was saying was, could you vouch for me? Could you let them know that we know each other, that I belong here? And of course, I met his parents. I was like, oh, your son is so great. And he is. And we were friends. And the parents had tears in their eyes because they knew that their son and his wife had walked away from faith for so long, the faith that they had brought him up in. And it took Hong Kong, of all places, to bring him back. Story after story of faith that has been restored or discovered. Did you know that that over 800 people have come to faith in Christ through Alpha alone here at Island? 800. 400 mission trips-ish. To Rwanda, Uganda, Mongolia, Taiwan, Korea, Indonesia, that we have followed God and recruited people and gone to serve, and almost without exception have come back, realized that we were the ones that were served, that we were the ones who had a faith that grew. Over 400 weddings, some performed right here, some on beaches, and some in exotic locations. I mean, just this summer, 2 of our pastors went to Italy and to the UK to do destination weddings. It's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it. The bigger story isn't the trip. It's the privilege to see a couple wanting to get it right. Against all odds, with a greater than 50% divorce rate, couples coming often with baggage in their past and families that are a mess to say, we want to get it right. What does God say about this? And sitting in counseling and thinking through hard areas to try to follow God in their marriage. To the young teenage kid who grew up in this church in our youth group, was so involved, and then would go off to college, as many do, and faith becomes on the back burner, and then it just leaves the burner altogether. And he would kind of at least be a covert Christian, not outwardly letting people know, but then would come back to the faith that his parents had walked so well and had modeled through all of his life right here in this church, and would go into full-time ministry in the U.S., would go to seminary, and then would come back, and as Kevin Kusunoki would join this staff, right? Story after story. Some big, radical, miraculous. Some not as much. But stories woven by God. And bringing us all together to share in the collective beauty of people that are still imperfect and yet forgiven and free. There's a third story, and it's God's story. Beyond what he's doing in your life, beyond what he's doing in our life, there's a bigger picture of what God has been doing from eternity past to eternity future. That is establishing his ecclesia. It's the word used in the scripture to refer to the church. But the reality is that this word actually means a gathering, an assembly. In its original context, it didn't mean a building or an address. It was a collection of people. It was the ecclesia, the assembly. In Acts 19, we see it used in this way, where it's translated in our Bibles, assembly. The assembly was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people did not even know why they were there. We're running on time, so I won't tell you the whole context. But we see the word used here properly. Ecclesia is assembly. As church history would tell us, it would be about the 4th century where Rome would declare that Christianity is legal. And at that time, Christians who had been worshiping undercover for so long would come out. And they would then gather in bigger groups, and they would rent spaces and meet in various homes and community centers, if you will. And there would be another name that would come out. It was a kuriakos. This word used to refer to the location. Oh, the kuriakos is over there. That's where the ecclesia meets, in the kuriakos. The assembly of Christians, the gathering of Christians meets in that kuriakos. As Christianity would spread out from the Roman Empire, it would go into a lot of different places. This term simply meant the house of the Lord, not God, the Lord, capital L, but it would refer to those who owned land, for example. Just a gathering of people, the kuriakos, the gathering place of some group of people. Now, as the church would grow and expand throughout the Roman Empire, it would reach other places. And for example, it would reach Germany, and they would localize it in their own language, and it would become this, Kirch, from which we get, which meant house of the Lord, from which we get church. So our modern day word church is not in the Bible. It's assembly in the Bible. It's gathering in the Bible. It's not church. We get that from German. What? And sadly, it has led us to believe, to name a church as a location. Where are you going? I'm going to church. But strictly speaking, biblically speaking, the church is us. It's people. It's a movement. It's organic. It's the presence of God among a group of people. And we meet at that location and that location, but the church is not something you leave, it's something you are. Unfortunately, over time, it has meant that we go to it and we leave it. And that has somehow had the disastrous effect of us in that it becomes a hobby or a slot in our schedule. It becomes a part of our life, not our life. But in its original intent, the ecclesia was not something you ever leave. You are the ecclesia. We are the church. We gather at a place, but we continue to church. We continue to be all that God has called us to be. As we wrap up in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus will use this word, ecclesia. In our Bibles, it's church. It shouldn't be, but because of what had been learned through centuries and the change in nomenclature, it is church. But if you look in the Greek, it's ecclesia, and it refers to a gathering, not a location. He was asking his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. And then he said to them, but who do you yourselves say that I am? It's a plural you. Who do you people say that I am? And then Peter, always the one to say, I'll speak on behalf, steps up and says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. What you have said is not just a rational thought. It's not just an accurate statement. It is a revelation from God. You have understood rightly who I am, that I came from God to reveal who he is. You're onto something, Peter. And I also say to you that you are Peter, not Simon. I'm changing your name, and Peter will mean rock, but specifically it means pebble or stone. And he says, I am going to call you pebble or stone. And upon this bedrock, he says, on this greater stone, this quarry, upon this rock I will build my ecclesia, my gathering of people in motion, organic, always ecclesia, always aware that God is at work. And then he promises this, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. He guarantees victory. He says his church will prevail. There will be nothing that will disrupt it. Do you remember SARS? Do you remember the Asian financial crisis? Do you remember bird flu? Do you remember COVID? Do you remember tear gas and protests? Just in 25 years, more financial crisis. Do you remember Lehman Brothers? There's been so many ups and downs. 5 times during COVID that we were forced to close the doors. And so we got one of those things and started filming. Creatively remembering what God had promised, that this thing will win. It will prevail. He says, not even Hades, referring to death. He says his death is not going to end this movement. Nothing will end this movement. The gates of Hades will not prevail. So your story, don't miss it. It's not just a school, a job, a wife, a husband, a kid or two, and a retirement. It is God amid all of those things. Don't miss it. He is wooing you. Our story. God is weaving together our story, displays of his grandeur, answers to prayer, things that God is doing in our midst that we celebrate today, 25 years worth, looking forward to all that he has for us. And God's story, he wins. He woos, he weaves, he wins. You join a winning team because you know the outcome. Wouldn't that be great if you knew the outcome of the horse races or your stock investments? You don't. But we know it, spiritually speaking, that this institution, God's church, is the hope of the world. And it will continue to be the place where people find meaning, purpose, redemption, forgiveness, all that their heart and soul longs for. Father in heaven, we're so grateful for your goodness in our lives. We're grateful for all that you have done in this part of your church, your bride, Island ECC. 25 years is not a lot, but it's enough for us to be able to recount your faithfulness and to see your hand so that we can trust your heart as we move forward. 25 years of people, some that remain, some that were here for a season and gone, but nonetheless people that have been gathered as your people to pursue your heart. And so we are grateful and we give you all the praise and all the glory in Jesus' name. Amen.